Well, good evening, everyone. It's 4:05 and I'm back just to briefly say that we again are appreciative to have you join us. Grace will begin to stop sharing her screen here in seconds. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank for everyone to know that our moderator tonight is one of our board members, Tara Beard. And so she's going to be walking us through everything. You're not going to hear much from me or the staff tonight. And then a huge shout out to Rose Teng, who's also happens to be a board member, but turns out she's one of our panelists this evening tonight, but she also doubles as a superhero, as a working mom, and have some stuff that's happening that she might need to step away, but just wanted to also thank her this evening for joining us as well. And with that, I am turning it expeditiously over to Tara. Thank you everyone for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Tabitha. Again, yes, my name's Tara Beard, and I am privileged to be on the board of the Powder and Park Neighborhood Association, and really excited, as I'm sure all of you are, to hear what our amazing panelists have to say and what amazing answers they have to all of our questions. So I will just start by thanking everyone for coming. And do a quick summary of the agenda so you kind of have a sense of what's to come. And then just kind of ask you a reminder to please keep on mute, keep your video closed, and I'll do the same when I'm not speaking, to Tabitha's point, to kind of keep things flowing and less distracting. So a quick summary of the agenda. After our panelists are introduced by yours truly, they will each have a presentation of about 10 minutes to talk to you about their work, their amazing work in equitable development, and to some specific topics as well within that. Then we will have our amazing graphic note taker highlights. So we have a graphic note taker artist kind of recording what is being captured here. And so our wonderful artist will share where things are at that point. And there will be an opportunity to also provide in the chat suggestions and things that you hope for them to capture when they are completing the process of kind of recapping our evening. Then we'll have time for questions, so please hold your questions. Feel free to put some in the chat, and we will get to them at that point in the agenda. I'll start with some questions, and then we'll open it up to audience Q&A that PPNA staff will have helped curate throughout the presentation. And then we will close and thank you again for being here. So that's the agenda that we have today. I will next share our speaker information and then turn it over to them to share with us their awesome presentations. So first I will introduce Baba Letang, who is the market manager at the Midtown Global Market, and was helping me learn how to pronounce his name. That was my little giggle. Just wanted to make that clear. Also from the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers, we have two amazing staff. We have Elena Gaarder, who is the Executive Director, and as Tabitha mentioned, Rose Teng, who is the Public Policy Director. And I believe we're going to start things off with the presentation from Baba. So I will pass it over to you. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Tara, and thank you all for having me. Thanks everybody for being here. It's indeed a pleasure to be here to talk about equitable development in our area. As she said, my name is Baba Letang. I am the market director, and I have been at MGM since we opened. So it's been quite a long time. It's been a very wonderful experience. So everybody knows the Midtown Global Market. It's owned by Neighborhood Development Center and Cultural Wellness Center. Neighborhood Development Center is the managing partner of Midtown Global Market. So you ask, well, what is the market all about? We are an incubation project where we try to develop small businesses. We have three different types of businesses here. We have the first step. People wanted to open a business, and this is the first opportunity that they have. We also have a second step. Somebody might have had another business in another location, and they were looking for a second opportunity. And we also have our anchor businesses that we also always look forward to at the market. What do we do? And when I say we do, I'm talking about both owners, NDC. Some of the things that we do at the market is we provide technical assistance to our businesses to give them the support that they need to survive and also to expand. things like website development and design. Right now, our NDC Business Lab is organizing what is called a tech pack. It includes the website development, also POS system development, and social media development. So these are some of the areas we provide assistance to our businesses. In addition to that, we understand that the market, although it is well known, but marketing is something that is a very significant aspect of the market. So we try to do that. And we do that, one, by trying to be on the TV. Some of you have probably been seeing MGM on the TV. We also organize some events. A couple of weeks ago, we had our Black Flea Market, which was basically a lot of Black-owned businesses, and it was a very successful event. We also did the Meals for Medics when the pandemic started, where we were providing free meals to the healthcare workers at Abbott.
And excuse me, Baba, this is Tara. I'm getting requests for you to speak a little closer to the mic so folks can hear a little bit better. I apologize for interrupting.
Oh, no, that's fine. I want to make sure everybody hear what I say, so it's okay. So yeah, I was saying that in addition to the technical assistance that we provide to our businesses, we also do marketing and events. And I was saying that we recently had a Black Flea Market, and there are a series of events we continue to do. Right now with the pandemic, we kind of try to be very careful, make sure that the market is a safe place, because safety is all part of being equitable, looking out for the wealth and the health of our community. So if you come to the market right now, we have, in terms of in relation to what are we doing to keep the community healthy. So those who come to MGM, they know it's a safe place to be. In each of our entrances, we have signage that you are required to have a mask, which is very important to us in the market. We also have an ambassador program. This are volunteers that are in the entrances of the market. When you come, if you don't have a mask, they will actually provide you with a mask. So everybody who comes into the market, they have a mask just to keep all of us, safe here. So we do that. Also, we continue to work with our businesses, providing some financial assistance. And we try to develop not just one type of business, but at the market, we want to be very fair. We want to be equitable, making sure that when we support all our businesses, we do not favor some businesses, over others, because we want the market to be a reflection of our community and the work that we're doing. And I'm speaking today specifically about the Midtown Global Market, as I said, which is owned by Neighborhood Development Center and Cultural Wellness Center. The Neighborhood Development Center, as most of you know, are doing a really wonderful job. We have a comprehensive program, a training, we develop loans, incubator programs, and this is just to name a few of some of the things that NDC does on a wider scale. But here at MGM, we continue. Recently, we did the Men Fund. We have our Friends of the Market, where we go out and try to raise funds that goes back directly into the business. You should have seen the expression on our businesses' faces when each of them got a check of $2,000. Some of you might say $2,000 is not a lot, but at a time like this, anything you get, it helps. So it was good to see the release on people's face to get that kind of assistance from us. Financial assistance is something that we continue to work on. We started here, we have about 45 businesses right now. We have about 37 businesses in the market. Unfortunately, we have lost some, and we have some that are we have some leases that we are working on, just to keep the energy of the market and make sure that our small businesses get the assistance that they need. So the marketing, to drive traffic and sales to them. And also the role of the market as part of the community. This personally is something that I am very passionate about. Midtown Global Market is not a separate entity in South Minneapolis. It is a part of the community, and we want to make sure that it is a place where people feel very welcome. Everybody feels very welcome, that we are also part of what's happening around us. So getting to know the different organizations, the different groups, the different people that work here, and making sure that there is a relationship with the market. It's a gathering place also for people to come to feel, empowered to come. So these are, in a nutshell, are some of the things that we are doing here at Midtown Global Market. Obviously, the last few months have been very challenging for us, but the leadership of this organization, including Cultural Wellness Center and NDC, working beyond the scene to create plans to really help support the small businesses. So I will probably stop here in case anybody have any other questions for me, and I will be very happy to answer it a little bit later. So I go back to Tara.
Thank you so much, Baba. I can personally attest to how welcoming the Midtown Global Market is. It's a fabulous place. I'm sure a lot of you listening in have been there, and if you haven't, you should go check it out. Next, I think we're going to hear from Elena and Rose from the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers. Baba welcomed questions, but I am going to ask that you put the questions in the chat, and we will get to those later in the agenda. And I'll turn it over to you, Rose and Elena.
Thank you so much, and thanks, Baba. Thanks to PPNA for having us at MCCD, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. Definitely, we are huge fans of the Midtown Global Market, both for the delicious food, but also a lot of the community building aspects that you mentioned. I'll get us kicked off here just to tell you a little bit of background information on MCCD. It's a long name, but we are an association of community-based nonprofit development organizations working in the Twin Cities. Last year, we actually celebrated our 30th anniversary of building opportunity in this work. Our mission is to work collectively to build strong, stable communities by leveraging resources for the development of people and places. And I think the collective part of that, strong, stable communities, those are the words that really stick out to me in the work that we do. Our members work across the full continuum of affordable housing, from providing housing with supportive services to affordable home ownership opportunities, and also a wide range of technical assistance services and training for entrepreneurs and small businesses. I think we're seeing that housing stability, support for small businesses are really crucial all the time, and especially right now. So yeah, so that, what that looks like for us is helping to secure public resources for affordable housing development, production, and preservation. In 2007, we also began providing loans to local businesses throughout the 7 counties and received our CDFI certification in 2010, Community Development Financial Institution certification in 2010. And then I guess I'll just turn it over to Elena there, who we welcomed as our new Chief Executive Officer in late April of this year. So have been privileged to work with Elena in this time. I think she has been a really strong guiding light for us as we manage working through a pandemic, even though it's been, I'm sure, challenging to start a new job in this time. So I'll turn it over to Elena to talk a little bit more about your role as CEO.
Thanks, Rose. So if you guys hear dogs in the background, I apologize when I'm unmuted. I've got a couple of rowdy dogs in the house, but so yeah, as Rose said, I just joined MCCD about 6 months ago. Interesting time to take over an organization. Before that, I was the Director of Community Wealth Building over at Nexus Community Partners, and really focusing on cooperative economics and democratic ownership models. And so excited to be bringing some of that to MCCD. I was looking at the themes of this conference, gather, mobilize, build. And if you look at the programs that we operate right now and sort of how we are as an organization, I think it kind of mimics those things, right? So we gather, like Rose said, we are a 46-member consortium of nonprofit organizations. And so we gather folks to really look at how can we be building the field and supporting the field of community economic development. our policy work, as you mentioned, Rose, that's sort of how we mobilize folks, right? So each year our members establish a policy agenda. And so we have Rose, we have Caitlin, we have Carrie working at the city, regional and state levels to really get at how do we shift policy and investments to strong, stable communities. And then the final thing is really building, right? So we run an emerging leaders and community development program, which is really looking at how do we have the next set of leaders in the community economic development sector. And then we are also a CDFI, as Rose mentioned. And so we do lending and technical assistance for small businesses across the 7-county metro area. So for folks that might not be familiar, when you are a CDFI certified lender, that means that you have to do 65 or 70% of your lending in BIPOC communities. And so that's one of the things that's really kind of one of our mission-driven things that we're doing is making sure that we put capital, we put technical assistance in BIPOC communities across the region. And so, Rose, if you could talk a little bit about then kind of an example of how that plays out in community.
Sure, yeah. So our public policy advocacy work is really to support the community development field as a whole. We are active at the state capitol, at the local and regional level, and we really value collaboration. So work a lot with our member organizations, but also other partners, primarily through coalitions. So we are a really active participant with the Homes for All Coalition at the state level, Make Homes Happen on the local level. And we've been working with the Minnesota Asset Building Coalition for the past few years with a particular focus on increasing capacity for community-based organizations that support entrepreneurship across the state. Another group that we work with a lot is the Equity in Place group, which is really working in collaboration with grassroots, community-based organizations, lifting up the voices of BIPOC leaders and community members. I want to just build on a little bit what Elena mentioned about our Emerging Leaders in Community Development program, because just to put a little plug in for our mentorship program, which is going to be starting in January. But this is our 10th round of this program where we match emerging leaders, early career or mid-career community development professionals, people who are just kind of getting started in their community development career, with a senior level leader. And Tabitha actually is one of the mentors that we've worked with in the past and have had a number of really fantastic mentors. I think we've had over 250 participants in the last 9 years of this program who have really grown with us. We have been really excited that some of the people that started in our early rounds as mentees are now mentors with our program. Just one example of somebody who's done that is D'Angelo Svenkinson, who is founder and co-director of NEOO Partners, which is a community development firm working in the Twin Cities. D'Angelo started as an emerging leader mentee with us, went on to volunteer with our mentorship and steering committee of emerging leaders, and now is one of the mentors in our program. And the reason why I do bring that up is because we have our application period for mentees is going to be open in December for our program, which is a 6-month program that runs from January through June. So if anybody on this call happens to be an emerging leader in the community development field and is looking for a mentor, I think especially right now in this time, having somebody outside of your organization who can provide some insight and guidance, just an extra set of ears to hear about the challenges and kind of support your professional development. I think it's a great program. So you can get in touch with me afterwards, or look at our website too. It's our Emerging Leaders program is on there. So yeah, that's what I'd like to add about that. And I think the the last question here is provide at least one example of how the group's work has changed with all of the events of this year, and I'll turn that over to Elena to get us started.
You know, I think just in terms of the Emerging Leaders Program, you know, everything is so different in how we work since the pandemic. And so, you know, just thinking about if you are going to be a mentor, if you want to be part of the program, you know, just encourage people to bring ideas about how to make this just really kind of bring life to this work as we do things more virtually. I think, you know, we're all just kind of figuring that out right now. I think with the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd, we've really, as an organization, had to look at how are we going to respond in this way. And so a few things that we've done, you know, MCCD is administering CARES Act dollars through our different city and state and county partners. And so since I started actually in late April, early May, we began doing that work. And it's really mission critical for us, I think, getting resources out. You know, like Baba said, even those $2,000 that they were able to provide were so meaningful for businesses. And so I think before the end of the year, we will have moved about $30 million in CARES Act funds to communities across the Twin Cities area. You know, but one of the things that we've seen is that there's been a lot of efforts to do outreach to BIPOC communities. The Alliance has been leading efforts in Hennepin and Ramsey County, working with a number of the organizations doing small business development and organizing on the ground to make sure BIPOC folks are benefiting from those funds. But we've also been looking at how can we raise funds from philanthropy to provide grants, you know, kind of more targeted grants, getting at businesses and community that we know we haven't been able to reach through the CARES Act dollars. And I think just at the systems level, really challenging philanthropy and other entities that do PRI investments to be able to put capital out in community that is more affordable, it's more patient, acknowledges that, you know, we can't be out there doing lending at a time where businesses are really struggling, right? So we've been trying to raise money actually to be able to provide 0 to 1% interest loans and to be able to restructure our debt as a CDFI with the businesses so that those that have, you know, maybe higher interest rates, shorter terms are able to come down to like 1% interest, right? And to be able to extend the terms of their loans. So really kind of looking at how as a CDFI do we show up in community differently and be able to bring in capital differently to our small businesses. I think that's all that we have for our presentation. And so I guess, you know, we can talk more. I'm sure we'll talk more during the moderator questions.
We will. Thank you so much, Elena and Rose and Baba, for those great presentations. It's now my pleasure to introduce Cori Lynn, who I mentioned earlier would be our graphic note taker, to share some of the key themes that she's captured from the panelists. And another reminder to please put in the chat anything you want our graphic note taker to consider for inclusion in the artistic recap. Can I turn it over to you, Cori?
Yes, please go ahead. So if you bear with me for a moment, I am casting what I am capturing notes on today, which is my iPad. So this is kind of the little doodles that I have been taking notes on so far. I'm seeing a lot of themes about the different ways that Baba, Elena, and Rose are supporting people through their organizations. Some of the big things that I have been capturing are the 2 quotes that I have right now, which from Baba are that we're not separate from South Minneapolis, wanting to add in that he said that they're a part of the community and they're being affected by the same forces. Rose also highlighting how much MCCD is working in collaboration with different groups, and that's how they're choosing to move as an organization to push both in policy and to help people directly. seeing that Elena brought in cooperative economics and how they're trying to push funding to move money, not just to invest, but also to distribute. I heard a lot of language around. I have to add a little bit more details in trying to clean up some of the text, but those are the really big themes that I've seen so far. Definitely would love to hear from the audience what you're seeing as well, or other images that stuck in your mind that you think that I could add to the illustration.
Thank you so much, Cori. There we go. Okay, so a great start on the artistic capturing of what we're talking about today. Grace is reminding folks too to feel free to share your thoughts in the chat, and we will pass them on to Cori and the rest of the group. So this is the part of the evening where we have some Q&A with our panelists and dive a little bit deeper into what people are hearing. I'm going to start with some initial questions, and then Grace and the PPNA staff are going to help feed me some of the great audience questions you guys have been peppering in the chat. So Elena, Rose, Baba, whatever kind of order you feel comfortable jumping in, please feel free to answer, if you've got something to add. So first question. What is one way that we can work together to ensure private development projects better reflect community priorities? That's not a softball to start with, sorry. But we would all, I think, love to hear some tangible ways that we can ensure private development projects better reflect community priorities.
I will start with that one. As I look at the question, the community priorities, and the thing that stands out in my mind is, when you think about priorities, is whose priority? And I think one of the biggest thing that we can do is to have the community, come together to decide what are the priorities. And so having engagement from the key players of the community, talking about the residents, the organizations, the group, the businesses, that we all continue to talk to each other. And even as I continue to communicate with people here, it seems like everybody has their own, sometimes, in some cases, there are different priorities. Some people might think this is the priority, another person might think this is the priority. But all of us continue to have an open dialogue, engaging everybody in the community, or at least a voice from the community, so that we can, first of all, develop the key realization, and that is, what are the priorities? So that's where we have to start. And once we can identify priority number one, whether it is, capital investment as part of the priorities, we all agree together that this is one of the priorities that we're going to work together. And then we can bring all the community and figure out the ways we're going to be addressing those priorities. Another one is, respecting the work of different organizations. There are some of our organizations in the community that work specifically in certain areas. They have the skills, they have the experience, they have the connections to help address the things that we're working on. So just kind of summarizing what I'm saying here is, first of all, that all of us will be on the same page in deciding what are the priorities. As a community, we know what they are. And also capitalizing on the resources, the groups, the organizations that are more equipped, better equipped to meet those priorities. So that's one of the things I would like to contribute here.
Anything to add, Rose and Elena? I love that. I really appreciated that, Baba, the importance of kind of recognizing that we all have different perspectives and we all have different strengths. And so kind of broadening those perspectives to develop priorities is key. Elena, Rose, anything to add?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in if okay. Definitely agree with Baba, and just that engagement is super important. And I think, what everybody is doing here, being engaged with PPNA or the neighborhood association where you live or work, maybe you don't live in the Powderhorn Park Neighborhood Association, but knowing that as a community member that your voice is important, and probably, a lot of people do that already. But, signing up for your council members newsletter to hear, just about some of the development projects. I think a lot of times, you know, making sure that your voice is heard within the timeline that is, you know, predetermined by the city or by other, you know, government entities is really important. And so neighborhood associations don't get a ton of time to comment on development projects, but they do get some. So if you're involved with your neighborhood association, I think that really helps. The only other thing I'd add is that I think private developers need to be representative of the community that they work in. So that's part of what we're hoping to do with our Emerging Leaders program, is to build the field of community developers, and you know, something that our entire membership, I think, is very engaged on too, is kind of supporting that growth of the field as a whole. And then just to paying attention, you know, right now the city of Minneapolis, if people here are Minneapolis residents primarily, is going through their budget cycle for the 2021 budget, and so is the city of St. Paul. And I think there are a lot of ways that you know, our values are laid out in our budgets and our city budget. So paying attention to that process, understanding what's in the budget, advocating for city budget allocations that would support BIPOC developers who are going to be from the community and work with the community. I think those are pretty important. In the city of St. Paul right now, there is specifically a budget item being considered that is related to growing the field of community developers and supporting BIPOC developers specifically. So if you are in St. Paul and following that budget process, making your voice heard, that's something that you support, I think is always an important way to be involved.
Thanks, Rose. Anything to add, Elena, or would you prefer I move on to the next question?
I think you can go ahead and move on.
Sounds good. Sorry to put you on the spot there.
That's cool.
It's hard in these virtual meetings, right? So the next question gets at really addressing the current environment in the long-term kind of and huge magnitude of property and business recovery that's going to be needed along some of the cultural corridors that were affected by the riots that were in response to George Floyd's murder. And so this question is asking, how can public and private groups accelerate their joint efforts to support this work? You know, we know that community development can take a long time when there aren't such immediate needs. And now we have these stark needs. And, you know, Elena, you talked about patient capital, but there's also the other end of the spectrum. How do we remove other barriers to make sure that that redevelopment can happen, or that reimagining recovery can happen as quickly as possible? So any thoughts from our panelists on how to accelerate the recovery of these important corridors?
Again, I could probably start here and just share some thoughts here. The first thing is for us to really not ignore the situation, what we're dealing with, and the magnitude of the situation. That is the first thing I would like to start with. The second one is coming together. We have some initiative. I know the Lake Street Council is working, and there has been a lot of support. And we want groups and foundations to continue to support those efforts. The city also continuing to play its role for, you know, kind of cleaning up the rubbles, that all of buildings that were destroyed, you know, assisting in those areas. Again, really focusing on the key businesses or aspect of our community. And I keep on saying that all the time. There are some businesses that we just cannot allow, you know, to stop functioning. These businesses or organizations, we need to really pay attention to them as we continue to do with everybody else, but already zero in on some of those that we're like, you know, this organization of business is key in our neighborhood, and we need to make sure that we see that they survive. The second thing is being trusting. I think in too many times where, you know, we don't trust, there's a lack of trust according to who you are, or, you know, your ethnicity, your background. And sometimes when you approach for opportunities, you've already been deprived because of who you are. And I think right now, in a time like now, trusting each other, trusting intentions is of significant importance, at such a time as this. Um, some of the things that we can do is support, like those of us that are in neighborhoods, shop where businesses are open, use the services of the places that are open and just trying to rebuild. So kind of give them the help in the ways that you can, making sure that we continue supporting, go to the city, talking to our council members, areas that we still feel that are priorities for us, kind of continuing to do that. Not ignoring some of the things that will affect or cause things to recur. So we've had this destruction, but making sure we put the policies in place that's not going to cause those things to happen again. Because even though we build and we allow things to go back, into the opposite direction, we're not making any forward movement. We make one step forward, two steps backwards, and that's not helping us. But kind of looking at the policies that are in place, the attitudes that we have towards certain organizations and businesses, and really giving them a chance to support them, giving them a chance that they can continue to succeed in the neighborhood. And also the organizations that are already doing the work, those that are involved in buying buildings and supporting the small businesses and the work that's going on, that we continue to make sure that we support them financially. And if they need to have a letter written to get on their behalf, we continue to do things like this. So I think in general is the community staying together, one, continuing building upon the success. Another thing we can do is probably learn from other states, learn some things that have happened, some success stories we have with, or things that happen in other locations. We could learn from those things and implement them in our area. But especially trust and making sure we make the resources that people need, that they get that resources, and that we are not just focusing on one set of people, but that people who need, they are getting what they need. So I could go on all day, but I'll stop here.
I would just jump in and say, Baba and Rose, you talked about policy, right? There's like these things, relationships, making sure that groups most in need have access to those resources, and so I think it really is, I would agree, it's sort of this ecosystem, right, of people, that are within the private sector, people within the public sector, people within the nonprofit sector, that, everybody has to engage, right? And I think that community, just in terms of, if you define community as those people living and working, also have relationships and resources to pull on, right? And so like kind of if you did like a power map, right? So kind of like an organizing approach, where would you put yourself, right? How do we really tap into just the talents and the resources that exist in community outside of these traditional kind of systems, right? And I think, I was pondering this question, I was thinking about, this word accelerate, right? And so how do we accelerate this development? And so it's like this balance, I think, of kind of patience and acknowledgement that these, while maybe we didn't see buildings burnt down, there was still the same challenges around disinvestment and, kind of access to capital and all these things, right? And so like these things existed before, they just are like brought to the forefront because of the murder of George Floyd, because of the pandemic, right? And so it's this balance of accelerate and at the same time be patient, right? At the tables that we sit at, Baba, Rose, Tabitha, other staff at PPNA, the board, there's a lot of conversation around, making sure that we do this community engagement, right? And so there's this pressure around community engagement and community priorities. And so while we balance patience, I think that let's not sit too long in this kind of framework of we need to do planning, right? Like we can't sit too long in that and I think Tabitha, I was in a meeting with you once and you said, how many times do we need to plan, right? People need affordable housing. People need affordable commercial space. People have said what they need, right? And so those of us that sit at different tables, just continuing to remind ourselves that we don't need a whole new plan, right? We don't need a whole new plan. We just need resources to implement the plans that have been put in place for decades and decades along East Lake Street, North Side, University Avenue in St. Paul. Yeah, that's what I got.
Okay, I could also, thank you very much, Elena, that is so good. Another thing I could probably talk about is the creativity aspect. You know, now, even at the Midtown Global Market, with everything going on, we're thinking about how can we, you know, increase catering and curbside and all those things. So business owners are being asked to be creative in as many ways as possible. That's the only way they could survive. Well, I think it's the same thing with the, you know, with the city, with foundations, with the people that are giving money, being creative. You know, sometimes, you know, there are some policies that you've had before that these are the criteria for you to get a loan or grant. But now being creative, seeing how things have changed right now, and trying to, you know, to develop certain policies and criteria that's going to make it, you know, easy, you know, for people to access the funding and the financial assistance that they need. Another thing that we should also do as people become, as funders become creative, I think accountability is something that is also very important. I think right now, it's not going to happen overnight. And one of the things that we can do is all the monies that we are receiving for grants or loans, to make sure that we are accountable with that. These are well spent to the best of our abilities, so that, you know, in the future, as we need more, then people will be more comfortable in giving because they feel a sense of, you know, accountability and assurance. But, and all that includes, you know, being creative also. So it's a joint effort. As she was saying, that those of us on the, you know, on the ground working, you know, we need the continued assistance of those that have the funding that can make it available to us. So that's my contribution too.
That's fantastic. I just want to check in with Rose or Elena to make sure there's no additional thoughts there.
No, I'm good.
Okay, I really appreciated that conversation. I loved, Elena, how you talked about balancing kind of patience with acceleration. And I think that's super key. I mean, we just can't wait for perfection, right? For everybody to be happy. But we've done a lot of this work and it's never been resourced. So I thought that was a great point. And Baba, I loved your points about creativity and trust. I think those, you know, really having to focus on how much we need to lean into each other to get this work done. So great conversation. Really appreciate your thoughts. The last question I have before we turn over to audience questions are if there's policies or other types of resources that would spur new pathways to community ownership as a form of equitable development. So as we look to recovery and more traditional forms of community development, how do we resource it through policies or funding to try and let it be community owned? I'll see who wants to take a stab at that one first.
I'll pop in there. So when I think, you know, one of the things you just said is kind of traditional community development, right? And I think that the kind of the policy and investment shifts that we need are not around traditional community development, right? Because traditional community development isn't community ownership, right? And so, you know, I think if you put your ear to the ground, you know, and even look up, you can see that there's so many groups formally and informally working on community ownership and cooperative economics, right? In terms of the housing arena, kind of commercial, land trust, real estate cooperatives, you know, worker cooperatives, all these different forms of kind of community and democratic ownership models. And so, you know, I was really excited to see that question because I think that really is where we can see a difference, right? As we look at recovery, as we look at rebuilding, right? Like who controls and owns the assets? And it has to move towards the collective, right? Kind of getting back to MCCD's mission. It has to be about the collective, and you can only get that through community ownership. I mean, maybe you can get it other ways, but I mean, that's, you know, I feel like that's something that hasn't been fully resourced before, or where policy hasn't focused enough before, is on different kinds of cooperative economic models. But you will see in the city of Minneapolis, there are some, you know, people are stepping towards that, right? So for a few years, the city of Minneapolis has had the Cooperative Technical Assistance Program. And so it works with people, entrepreneurs who are interested in looking at the feasibility of cooperatives. And so they have courses, free courses that you can take, and then also access to technical assistance providers. I'm trying to think who those currently are. I know Nexus Community Partners is a provider, maybe LEDC, I don't know. I wish I knew all the answers. Of course I know Nexus, but where you can get access to free technical assistance to really look at how to build out a cooperative community-owned business. I think that program has been under-resourced in the past. And so that is kind of, I think, one investment that the city of Minneapolis can make in really the long-term wealth building and community, long-term economic vitality of the corridor. The city also has a 2% commercial development loan. And I think that that is, you know, kind of moving in that direction. I know that the Commercial Land Trust, which I think it, you know, that's a recent initiative that the City of Lakes Community Land Trust is providing fiscal agency for, and kind of nurturing, right? There's an advisory group of community members. And so they would be eligible for that as well. Not sure how that's going to work with real estate cooperatives, but I would imagine that that program would align. And so I think it's those kinds of things, really pushing towards flexibility in how kind of current commercial and housing resources are funded. I mean, I think when you look at community wealth building and really acknowledge that this kind of local and broad-based ownership and these ways of doing business, these business models, they are business, right? They are ownership. And so it's really these small shifts, I believe, in policy and in investments, right? It's like we have to name it, right? We have to have examples of it, right? So the housing cooperatives over in the Corcoran neighborhood, right? That Equinix and the residents of the buildings, you know, and so many of the other kind of nonprofit and different organizations, like the way that they built up the resources to do that. Like we need to take that model and we need to expand it, right? So yeah, that, all of that.
All of that, yeah. This is good stuff, Elena. She said so many things that there's hardly anything else I can leave to that. I can add to that. But one thing, couple of things I would add here. One, when I hear about policies and new policies, the first thing I would say is one, there are some policies that are already in place. And first of all, we need to implement and enforce those policies because, you know, we can write as many new policies as we like, but if those policies are not going to be implemented, it makes no sense. So first thing is the policies that are already written, making sure that, you know, we implement them, you know, in an equitable way to support the community. Another thing is making sure that we have the right people and that will enforce them. There are some people, there are certain issues that are closer to your heart. You are more passionate about that. And if we engage those people and organizations also, the organizations that work in certain areas of those policy making, you know, get them involved because they are more passionate. If you have the wrong set of people trying to implement policies that probably they don't understand or that's not really close to their heart, that's where we have a breakdown in success and, you know, progress. Because, you know, you just write something but you really believe it. But when you bring the right people to the table who are really passionate about it, for example, for people who see, for example, like crime, I'm really concerned about crime. I'm just kind of saying people that are really concerned about this. And they can tell you, well, it affects us in this way, it affects us in this way. These are the people that we want to make sure that are at the table, talking about the policies, that you bring them together, give them, a place that their voices could be heard. The other thing I want to talk about the policies is, set the platform for success. If you're going to put a policy, if people are requesting maybe like $5 million, your policy should not be to get $1 million. It's already failing at the beginning. So let's kind of make sure when we do a policy, we go all the way out. If people are asking for $5,000, that's the need to make a difference. When we do the policies or when we make this decision, let's make decisions based on achievable goals, achievable requests. And I think all that tying up to what Elena was saying, that, being intentional about what we're doing. So just to round up here, one, not just to write new policies, but to implement those that are already here, that are very effective. Another one, we should throw away outdated policies. There are policies that were written for maybe 15 years ago that are not relevant today. Let's put those things. We cannot operate in a new system with an old policy. So let's put that away. Let's kind of look at the needs right now, bring in the right people, the right organization to really create that policy that will reflect the priority of the community, and also reflect ways that the answers that we're looking for, the goals that we're trying to achieve, that those goals will be achieved because of the right people and applicable policies to meet the needs of today. So that's my contribution in that.
Just leaving some space for any additional thoughts.
I think we probably should have said that before, and I waited. We want to thank and acknowledge all the good work that has already been done. I know we talked about policies, so we want to really thank, all our founders, all our foundations, the city, every good thing that has already been done, even the individuals that have been contributing to certain initiative. I want to make sure that I say, thank you for all what you're doing. So today, our discussion here is not that nothing is working. There are a lot of things that are already working, and we acknowledge that. So all of you leaders who are working in your area, the hard work that you're doing, we want to acknowledge your effort. And so we want to say thank you. All we're talking about is how do we take things moving forward to the next level. So I just wanted to kind of make sure that I acknowledge that there are great things that are already happening. And I wanted to say thank you for all the work every one of you are doing in your own field. Thank you very much.
What a great final thought. I really appreciated that conversation and back and forth so much. It's really interesting to think about kind of that. I love that point about implementing and enforcing existing policies, and to Elena's earlier point about implementing plans that have been waiting for resources. So this is just a really great conversation. I appreciate it. There are going to be some community questions coming up, but let's take a quick break to check in with Cori and see where she's at, what she's hearing, and how she's showing that graphically. Cori?
Hey everyone, I'm going to share my screen again. One moment. Great. So I have captured a lot of quotes. These are kind of my more of a finished summary of the first rundown that Rose, Elena, and Baba gave. I just added a little bit more detail and gave it a title and highlighted those two quotes. But I think I added a little bit more about the loans that Elena was talking about during pandemic, but beyond that, there's not that much more there. The new things that I added was at first I was capturing these quotes, and these were a lot of the ones that I was really hearing, especially at the beginning of talking about priorities of whose priorities are we hearing from. Rose and Baba talking a lot about how engagement is really critical to the process, but it's needed from both sides. So those are kind of the two at the top. And then when we were kind of talking about the responsibility of private developers, I'm hearing Elena talk a lot about the need of representation, and then also that we need to push, that whole plan of that we don't need necessarily a new plan, we just need funding to push these pre-existing plans. Also thinking a lot about collective ownership and community ownership, and those being those really cool examples of those development models already happening in our city. Also hearing at the end, Baba talking about how small businesses on Lake Street are getting really creative, and funders should really be matching that as well. But after kind of scrawling out a lot of those quotes, I pulled out these 4 themes that I think I'm going to illustrate a little bit more, which is creativity, moving to community ownership, making engagement critical and accessible, and then passionately implementing and funding these policies. So that's where I'll be doing for the next little part of our conversation.
That's fantastic, Cori. Thanks so much. It's so cool to see what you're getting, and I think folks should still feel welcome to add in the chat anything they'd like Cori to capture. Right? Great. All right. Well, I think we're ready to move into some of the questions that came from you all here. So the first question comes from Tom. How many community development agencies are there in the Twin Cities metro area? And what's the total amount of money that these agencies have combined? I'm guessing estimates are going to be okay. And for your respective organizations, how many businesses have or are being served and the success ratio? So there's a couple things there. I'm going to just repeat the question. How many community development agencies are there in the Twin Cities? And what's the total amount of money that these agencies have combined? And for your respective organizations, how many businesses have or are being served, and what's the success? So another softball for y'all.
That's a lot. I'll yield to Baba to answer some of those questions. I can hop in, but.
All right. First of all, that is a big question. I don't have the answer to some of those questions. Like what I could talk about. And as you heard my presentation, that's one of the things I was saying, that there are certain people and organizations that are more versed, and qualified to talk about certain things. Now, what I'm going to do is to talk about what we have done here from MGM point of view. When I started, I said we had from MGM, not NDC. NDC is an organization, for example, in 2020. We had about 137 jobs retained in 2020, and we continue to work. I mean, in as much, let us see that the amount of people we've assisted is 437. I'm just kind of reading here. Estimated dollars we assist businesses return to their neighborhoods about almost $73 million. So we are keeping track of the effectiveness of our program here at NDC. Some of the things that we're doing here. NDC, we continue to, in 2019, almost 4,000 jobs that we're maintaining in the neighborhood. At MGM, as we think of, like I said, we had 45 different businesses, and now we're down to 37. And some of the businesses fell along the road because some of them were just not getting the sales. Some of them were already afraid of COVID. They didn't want to get COVID. So we've had that, but our goal is to continue to, to increase, our spaces in the market, which is going to really help the market on a whole. So I know I'm kind of rambling here, so I'm going to stop here. Let me get my thoughts together on that question. It's a difficult question.
That's a lot. So there are, I think, 23 or 25 certified community development financial institutions in the state of Minnesota. In the Twin Cities, of the CDFIs, I'm going to count, right? We've got NDC, MCCD, Latino Economic Development Center, African Development Center, African Economic Development Solutions, Asian Asian Economic Development Center, community, what's CRF mean? Community Reinvestment Fund, MEDA. And so there's multiple, I think there's many CDFIs across the Twin Cities. There's also groups like Neon over on the north side. There's groups that do community development that are not certified CDFIs, but certainly have a pulse on the community and are doing really amazing technical assistance work. I think the size of their kind of portfolios, right, vary, very differently. MCCD, we have about a $10 million portfolio. We currently have about 300 loans out to businesses across the metro area. And so I think in the world of CDFIs, I was talking about this the other day, like, are we like a big fish in a little pond, or are we a little fish in a big pond, right? Because CDFIs are all different sizes, right? So like, for example, Baba, you might agree with this or know more. Like CRF, for example, is a really big fish, right? Because they're a national CDFI, right? Like MCCD, like NDCs probably in MEDA, there may be medium-sized fish, right? Like they might be like a small walleye or something. There's some, sunfish if you fish in Minnesota. And so I think that we're all, different shapes and different sizes, right? But collectively have a lot of capital, a lot of access to capital, and serve thousands of businesses every year. MCCD, again, we have over 300 loans out there. These are really hard times, right? And so a lot of our portfolio are restaurants, which are particularly at risk. I mean, it's a risky industry. And again, like thinking about Midtown Global Market. So the success rate then typically really pretty good. I think we have a pretty low risk, like, people see us as having higher risk loans, but we have a pretty low default rate. I think we're going to see more during the pandemic, right? And I think businesses along, East Lake over north, again, University in St. Paul, because of the murder of George Floyd, might see higher default rates. Hopefully not, though. I mean, I think, people are really putting resources out there in community, but certainly our portfolios are at risk, right? And that's where kind of, Baba, what you were talking about, creativity, right? And how people need to act differently, how, the public sector, philanthropic sector needs to be creative. And I think trust, right? It's trust people will do the right thing, right? Trust that we're going to get the resources out where they're needed, and people are going to use those resources to benefit, to stay alive and to benefit community.
I think those are as good of answers as are kind of possible given the mountain of that question. I also have to, Elena, ask you to share with Rose. I know she left us right before Cori gave us her second peek at what she's working on, and I wanted to acknowledge and thank her where she could hear it. So if you'd pass that along, we're deeply grateful to Rose for participating today. And then I also just want to remind folks, we have a ton of great questions. So I know that they are super tough questions and require a lot of thought, but at the same time, the quicker we can get some thoughts out there, the more questions we can get to in the time. So with that, I will jump into the next question, which is from Amy. BTAP and CTAP, and I'm wondering if someone on the panel could help us spell out those acronyms. I don't know if it's technical advisory panel for businesses or what, but they are programs offered by the City of Minneapolis to help small business development and cooperatives. How do you relate to those city programs, and in what way do you engage with cooperatives?
So the BTAP program is the technical assistant program that we have at NDC. And earlier on in my presentation, that's one of the things that I was mentioning. The city, we have a partnership with the city where they give us some funding to help businesses. And NDC, for example, right now we have a program that we're putting together called the Tech Pack. And what that involves is like website development. That money that we get goes into paying to help the small businesses, website development and design. That's the business technical assistant program, the BTAP here. And POS develop things that they need, marketing and social media. We help those small businesses using those experiences.
MCCD is also a business technical assistance provider. Like many, kind of to the previous question, most of the CDCs, the small business development shops are sort of like, you know, we're like the folks that the city has said, yes, you could go to them for business technical assistance. And so MCCD does that as well. There's only a couple, like I mentioned, CTAP providers, because I think people looking at cooperative business models, it's not as well recognized, I think, as it should be. I know LEDC has been doing that work for some time, not certain that they're a provider. I think for MCCD, one of the things, you know, I mean, one of the reasons I came to MCCD was so we could have more of a continuum of businesses that we support. You know, really looking at, you know, sole proprietor, small micro businesses to cooperative businesses, right? I mean, that's a vision that I have for the organization, and to be able to use our technical assistance and our our CDFI platform to be able to do that. Last year, one of our staff people, Mara O'Neill, she retired. She worked with a cooperative called Happy Earth Cleaning, and they were a privately owned business that the owners sold to their employees, right? And so we provided support in doing some help with just, you know, financial kind of like helping the staff understand financial statements, put together a package to apply for funding for Shared Capital Cooperative, which is also a CDFI. And so it was kind of, we got kind of dipped our toes in the water, right? And so I see that as something that MCCD, NDC, other groups can do, because again, like I said earlier, it is just a slight pivot, right? Businesses are businesses, whether or not they're worker owned or they're sole proprietors, right? They're businesses. And so while we are just kind of starting that work, then over the next year, we're really going to lean in more in terms of how do we provide technical assistance? How do we partner with those that are already kind of doing that work? And then also, how do we lend our support and capital into promoting and lifting up community ownership, democratic ownership models, right? I'm particularly interested in the conversion of privately owned businesses to worker cooperatives. And that's something that I've been working on for the last 3 years over at Nexus. Huge opportunity, right? Huge opportunity. And I think just in terms of how we could transfer wealth from, you know, really white baby boomer owned male businesses to workers, I think we could really see a shift in kind of where wealth lies in our community.
Right. You know, I was going to add that all those information, the city of Minneapolis have really good information on their website. So if people that need more information, you can just refer to that. So the B tab is for the businesses and the C tab for the cooperative.
Thank you, Baba. Thanks, Elena. All right, our next question is from Ian. It's actually, there's a two-parter. So starting from Ian, how do we know what community priorities are? And the related question comes from Peter, asking specifically, how, Baba, do you define community in a geographic sense? So what is the geography of community that you think of? And generally, how do we know what community priorities are?
Right, that's a very good question. Thank you. Well, community could mean your nearby community. I have always learned that there is a close community, a wider community, a global community. So we can go as as your next door neighbor, my community, your village, or the west of the world. But here, for the purpose of this conversation, I think we're talking about more maybe our community here, like a 1 mile radius, 2 mile radius. I think we're talking about, maybe if we talk about Lake Street, you know, that area, you know, Midtown, Powderhorn, that becomes our community. And identifying the priority, it's really not us as leaders deciding what it is. It has to come from the community. People saying, this is important to me. You guys want to give me transportation, but I want to feel safe. Safety and, you know, security is the priority for me. It's really more from what the community needs. So, I mean, I can go on talking about that, but really your community is where you are, from short or wide, and really priority is what you hear most people are asking for.
I think I would say, you know, there's so much intersectionality in the work that we are all doing, right? And so there's not like one, like, there's not going to be commonalities across people's identities, right? There's not going to be, you know, one community priority. And so I think that that really gets at the kind of leadership piece, right? And the voice piece, and that, you know, people, regardless of, you know, where they come from, who they love, how they worship, all those things have to, you know, we have to have representative leadership, because only then do we can like say community, you know. And I think I really appreciate the question, because it just reminds me, you know, we throw that word around all the time, right? And like community. And so, you know, PPNA, community, designated community organization, right? It's a geography, right? But within Powderhorn, which, you know, I don't live there anymore, but I think it's like one of the best neighborhoods in all of the Twin Cities, right? I mean, there's just such a rich fabric of people that kind of make up that community. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but that's just kind of what, you know, kind of what came to mind for me, was just the intersectionality of the work that we're doing and the importance of voice and leadership.
Great, thank you both. Oh, did you have something else to add, Baba?
Oh, no, just, you know, going back to civic class, you know, people with some things in common, you know, so, yeah.
Thank you. All right, our next question comes from Amy. I'm confused about the lack of government support for rebuilding Lake Street. I understand that federal money, FEMA money, was denied, as was helped through the Minnesota legislature, the state legislature, in our last bonding bill. Can you clarify? Any insight you, Elena or Baba, can offer into government support for Lake Street recovery?
I'm blinking. You know, that is really just how partisanship is playing out at the state, right? You know, MCCD, you know, folks, Baba, others, business owners, you know, we're at the Capitol. We're trying to get money designated for Lake Street. You know, PPNA was involved in that, at those tables. And so, you know, I think when you're looking at kind of at least statewide, you know, the plight of Black and brown people and businesses on Lake Street just hasn't been, you know, it's not a priority. It's just it's a symptom of a larger system. And so in some ways it doesn't surprise me. We hope that in the next session that will be taken up again. In terms of at the city level, you know, there has been some resources that have been put in place, but I think really it's, you know, philanthropy, just average people in terms of how they're kind of donating money. That's where the bulk of the resources I think have come from. So I don't have a good answer as to why government hasn't leaned in, other than just kind of ongoing partisanship and systems of white supremacy. That's, you know, it just goes back to that. The whole thing, also I would add, the narrative around defunding the police was really used by some leadership in the Republican Party to say, well, you know, they're just wanting to defund police. This community wants to defund police. And because of that, we can't support and get behind resources to rebuild this area where activists are, you know, wanting to, you know, destabilize and increase crime. Those were kind of the conversations that were happening.
Right. I think the government needs to value, you know, the assets in each of the community. We talk about trust, where, you know, you look at every community and see them as part of the country. Look at the contribution that they're making in their own area. Because sometimes, you know, you think about the contribution of the country, it really starts in small areas like, you know, Lake Street, for example. The contribution that you make here has an impact on the city. So I think from the government point of view, is really understanding and respecting and valuing, you know, the different groups and the demographic in certain areas. I think that's probably why we're seeing that. I mean, I could go and talk about government here, but I think really valuing everybody and really seeing communities as contributing to the overall success of the country as a whole. They don't see that.
Thank you. Thanks, Baba. Thanks, Elena. So this next question is kind of getting at, I think, wanting to hear more about, instead of kind of providing interventions or assistance, how do we kind of change the structure or the system so that equitable development doesn't require intervention to happen? And kind of related to that, you know, what can folks who are listening do that aren't in this field? And I know Rose talked earlier about, you know, signing up for that newsletter, paying attention to the budget when it's going through your city's, you know, review process and approval process, but asking for more advice on what individuals who aren't experts in community organizing could do to ensure more equitable development.
Well, whoever asked that question is starting the right way by asking questions, being curious about the people, the right people that are doing this, and, you know, attending meetings, you know, doing some research. And again, looking up to the organizations that really work in those fields. I will always go back to people. Not every organization does a wonderful job in every field. You know, identifying organizations or individuals that are passionate about things like that and making sure we get into contact with them, you know, by being curious and just learning and asking questions. So I think asking that question is a good place to start, and just signing up and attending conferences like being here today is a good sign. You can learn, you know, more about that. So yeah.
You know, I think you know, there was a question earlier that was talking about kind of the public and private sectors, right? I think that investments really have to go to people within the private sector, like we talked about, kind of BIPOC, women-owned developers, right? So much of the resources go to nonprofit developers, right? Who can access different pots of capital, right? And that's a good thing, right? We get affordable housing built, we get commercial properties built, but I think until we see more equitable, like more equity in where resources go, and have less money go to nonprofits and more money go to private developers and businesses, I think we really have to see that shift, right? I think as a person that's not in the field, it's like, where do you see, where are the cooperatives that exist in your community, right? Where are there businesses that are worker owned? You know, I mean, of course, you know, shop at the food co-ops, those kinds of things, right? Where are there businesses that are worker owned? Where are there companies that you know, if you work at an organization or, you know, any place that buys things, right? How do you buy from those cooperatives, right? And so it's like kind of looking at how do you start small and support the local economy? And I would assert that then how do you support the cooperative economy, right? How do you be part of the collective? Because that's not only a practice, but it's a value, right? So by practicing that value of the collective, by kind of participating in the informal and formal economies, that's how we start to be able to get systems change, right? And so systems change takes time, but if we have everybody that's part of it, then we can begin to see change happen in our communities. It's not going to be at a really fast pace. It's gradual, but it's necessary for each and every one of us to do that.
Right. And you know, the person talk about being proactive, which is, I mean, even the nonprofit organization in their strategic plans, you know, rather than trying to, you know, intervene, but thinking of what are the needs, the priorities of communities, and in your strategic plan, try to, you know, find ways of addressing the needs. So that's what I would add also.
Great, thank you both. We're going to try to squeeze in one last question, but we are at 5:25, so as succinctly as you can, which is ridiculous once you hear the question. But this question is from Lynn, and asking about racial wealth disparities in our neighborhood in South Minneapolis, and kind of how has that been analyzed? How will we organize to obtain the vast resources needed to overcome those disparities? And the question asks to speak to the real scale of racial wealth disparities, and be honest about the resources to close those gaps, or perhaps lack thereof.
Elena, you want to take a shot at that, because I have a mouthful on that and I don't think I'll be able to stop if I go on.
I'm not sure if I could be succinct with that one either. I think that the kind of like the depth at which that has been analyzed is, you know, things have been analyzed forever. I think, you know, the data's been out there forever in terms of the racial wealth gap. You know, if you look at asset poverty, you know, the numbers are dismal, right? The resources, I don't think that you could have enough resources that would eliminate kind of the racial kind of wealth gap, and then also move it beyond conversations about just getting parity, right, with white wealth. I think that it has, like, there's no amount of resource that can be put without intentional systems change work. Because the resources, there are resources out there, but without that systems change, it's not sufficient. Yeah, I could go on and on about that, so I don't know that I could be succinct either.
Right, so because, you know, I mean, that question, it could go into, you know, from education, you could even go from that angle, you know, making sure that there is, you close the gap in education, making resources available to people. There are some people that are going to the bank and they don't have the capital to get loans. But as I was saying earlier, making available, you know, loans to them, giving them a chance. Because, you know, unfortunately, not everybody has the same thing that some other people have. And the barriers, you know, the barriers for some people making that headway is so difficult. And as I said, that's a thing I could go on talking about for a long time, but we don't have time. I just acknowledge that there is a real a difference, and it is a work that we all have to continue to work on, not ignoring it. It is real, but kind of thinking from an education and investment point of view, you know, even how we treat people also, the trust that we have people. You know, you look at a person and you begin to put a, you know, like a failure cap on them. That person has the ability, that's a human being. You know, you treat them with dignity and respect. I mean, like that's what I'm saying, it's a big question and I appreciate it, but I just don't have time to really dig into it because I'll get a little bit emotional and passionate.
I so appreciate that, and really appreciate your honesty there, Baba and Elena, to the extent you could kind of touch on some of those questions, or some of the answer to that question, because it was definitely not a 5-minute answer kind of a question. Unfortunately, we are close to the end of our time here today, and as some of you may have noticed in the chat, Grace talked about additional questions that came up that we weren't able to get to today, and that we will work on ways to get that information, those questions and some answers to those questions or resources about those questions out to those who participated. I have to just share that this was a complete honor and privilege to be here, and I am so grateful and appreciative of all of you that chose to join us, especially given that some of these questions reflect that not everybody here is maybe an expert in community development, that the interest in equitable development is especially heartening. So thank you all so much for being here. An incredibly special thank you to Baba and to Elena for, and Rose, of course, to spend their time with us and share their thoughts with us and give us the perspectives that they uniquely have around this topic. And really at this point, I turn it back to PPNA staff to share some information about how to get a recording of the session and close us out. So thank you everyone, speakers and attendees. It was my privilege to be here and moderate tonight.
Thank you so much, Tara. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I'm going to try to keep it tight because we're already at 5:30. Tara, you did an amazing job. And again, extra shout out to our panelists, Baba, Elena, and Rose, who joined us tonight to have this discussion. I also want to acknowledge and thank Cori Lynn, an amazing artist and previously used to support the organization until she went away. So thank you for being here. I also want to lift up the voices of the other artists who have been popping in or who will be popping into all of our sessions. They're part of Studio Fallow, and that includes Donna Bayou Thomas, Olivia Levins Holden, and Nell Pierce. They are going to help us to enrich how we share out all the things that we're hearing in these sessions over the course of the summit. The notes that we're capturing, the visual artist renderings related to the sessions and the recordings themselves, we will make sure all of those are made available by the end of next week. If you're so inclined, we also have this evening, we have another session that kicks off at 6 related to environmental justice. And then on Friday, we wrap up with our final 2 sessions, which will focus on livability and safety and self-care and wellness. So if you're able to come back and join us for any or all of those, we would love to have you. We are deeply grateful for your interest and your willingness to think about how we can support community together. How can we move beyond just pandemics, uprisings and elections and any form of crisis. I think that this is one way to do that, is by having very rich conversations and be inspired by people in the community doing some of the work. With that, we will actually end our equitable development session, and we thank you for your time spending it with us this evening.
Okay. Thank you for having us. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening.